this is the first of the Introduction to Buddhism class of the 4 evenings. And so I'm assuming that you are either quite new to this topic or you want to refresh it. And I think that's very good. I'm really happy to see you all here. And I think I would like to start with pointing out the fact that Buddhism doesn't grow old. You know, Buddhism is 2,600 years old. It's 2,600 years ago that Buddha Sakyamuni lived in India, taught in India, wandered all over for decades, spreading the Dharma. 2,600 years ago, he was born as Prince Siddhartha, but his teachings are totally relevant today. It's magic. It's magic, isn't it? Why is it possible? How is it possible? Something 2,600 years ago. It's alive, it's available, and it's completely relevant. Totally relevant to us today in the 21st century. In some teachings it says it's like finding the barely existing still alive. It's like finding wheat or barley or some grain growing in the middle of winter. Maybe that's not a good example because I know there are some grains that grow in the middle of winter, but I think that means like under snow, in frost, in really difficult, harsh conditions. It's that rare and precious. It's something so precious, and the reason it is because it can help deal with all our problems. It can help free us from all our problems. So Buddhism is not hindered by cultures. It's not limited by language or by century, by lifestyle, by race. And why is that? It's because it deals with mind. Buddhism is about the mind. Buddhism is about how do we deal with all our ups and downs? How do we tame the mind? How do we find freedom? How do we free ourselves from everything that holds us back? That's what the Buddha taught about the mind. So I guess for that reason, people often debate, is Buddhism a philosophy? Is Buddhism a religion? What is it? A way of life? A way of thinking? Now, when you come to a place like this, you would say it's a religion, wouldn't you? We have a shrine, and we bow down to the shrine, and we pay homage, and we do prayers. But everything we do is about the philosophy that the Buddha taught. Everything that we do is a way of practicing, or trying to practice what the Buddha taught. So it's something unique, I feel, in that it has no limitations. 21st century, you would think, wouldn't you, that, it's outdated by now. The way things change these days, you know, how quick things move on. Fashion, mobile phones, iPads, there's not one thing that, you know, you bought one version, you already have to look for the next version because you know the previous version that you had does not connect up with the one you had before or whatever. You know, there's all sorts of complications due to things becoming outdated. So Buddhism is timeless because the issues that we have today are the same that mankind has always battled with. Cultures is different all over the world. Times are different all over the world, whatever, sometimes there are easy patches in world history in different countries, sometimes there are more difficult patches. You look at Europe, there has been First World War, Second World War, then those of us who were born after the Second World War, we were incredibly fortunate because we've lived a very good life in Europe. We've had no major wars, we've had a life of comfort and very peace and material comfort. But of course that all changes. Wherever you look in the world, times change, but throughout these centuries, what mankind deals with is the same problems. Warring, whether it's warring in 21st century, 20th century, 19th century, 10th century, it means killing each other. People were killing each other. Why were they killing each other? They were fighting because of greed or aversion, fighting over material, land, etc., material things, land, borders, whatever. So the issues that people have had throughout the times are not so different. The things that people have had to go through when there is loss and gain, pain and suffering, happiness and joys, hunger, sickness, that's the same, isn't it? Do you really think that people in so-called the old days, they were so primitive that they didn't, even if technologically it was so primitive, do you not think that they suffered in the same way when they lost a child, when they lost a husband or a wife, or when they did not have food to eat? I don't think really the feelings or the state of mind was that different. And when we talk about our internal reactions and feelings and our sufferings, our pains, and what we go through personally in life. So for that reason, the Buddha's teachings are totally relevant, because that doesn't change. Us, we as human beings, we are doing the same old thing. Like Akong Rinpoche once said to me, in relation to a thing that happened in my life, he said, it's the same old story of suffering. Each time we think it's something new. Each time we think my situation is different, my thing will work out different. But it's the same old story. For us it's new, but in reality it has been going on for centuries. In fact, since beginningless time, according to the Buddha's teachings. But so, we should rejoice at that. We should really feel how fortunate, how incredibly fortunate to have found this Bali in the middle of the snow, in the middle of the icy mountains. How fortunate to have found something that can actually address the issues that I'm going through. We don't need psychiatrists, we don't need psychologists. We just have to learn to understand what is happening, how to deal with our mind. So we're incredibly fortunate. We should rejoice at that. And I think, so that's one point I really want to make, how relevant the Buddha's teachings are today. And then another thing is that the Buddha's life itself is an example to us. So the Buddha was born as like many of you might know his life story already, but the Buddha was born as a prince, right? Prince Siddhartha, before he became the Buddha. So being a prince in India meant privilege, protection, wealth, lots of good things. He lived a good life. He was born, his father was the king. He lived in a palace. I think in those days India was divided up into many different kingdoms. It wasn't, the borders were not as we know them today. But so the prince was born into this privileged life of wealth and we could maybe compare that to see today, living a privileged life. What the Buddha's example shows us is that he renounced all of that. He had plenty of material wealth. He had, in fact, in his life story, it says that his father was so concerned that he would leave his life as a prince and not take on the role of the next king, and instead embrace the holy life, that he surrounded the prince with all the most perfect things. There was not any little sign of impermanence or decay around him. That was the degree he went to. It was like he was attempting to seduce him, you could say, into the pleasures and into by all the material things that he surrounded him with. It says that even the flowers around him were whisked away the moment they started to show signs of decay. They were drooping. Even before that happened, new flowers came in. Everything was perfect. He was trying to create this perfection out of fear of him leaving the palace. So the prince, being a prince and being young and curious, he managed to one day escape the palace. Not escape as such, but he managed to go exploring probably with a whole crowd of attendants with him. And it says one day he left through, say, the western gate, another day through the eastern gate, to the northern gate, to the southern gate. Each time he left, he saw something different out of the palace walls. He saw things he had never seen before, because his father and mother had protected him to that degree. So first time he saw a lot, probably not only one person, but many people who were ill. He saw sickness for the first time, because anyone sick around the prince was ushered away. Now you would have had leprosy, you would have had so many illnesses that you could see very visible signs, very frightening signs of illness. And the prince was shocked, and he asked his attendant, saying, "What has happened to these people? What is wrong with them? All these sores, missing limbs, whatever." And the prince, the attendant said to him, "Your Highness, this is part of life. You're born. There's sickness. Sickness is part of life." So next time when he left through the other gate, say western gate, northern gate, it says then he saw for the very first time an old person. Really old, decrepit, maybe walking with a stick, bent over very low, maybe bad sight. All the, not sort of cozy old age, but someone who were really had worked very hard in their life and had, you could say, what you call decrepit old age. Your body has really deteriorated. And again he was shocked and asked the attendant, what is wrong with this person? And again he was told, this is part of life, sickness and old age. Third time then he went out through the eastern gate, and there he came across a funeral procession. He met this party of people carrying a dead body, crying, a lot of unhappiness, and a dead corpse. So here he was told, this is death, Your Highness, this is death, this is what happens. There's birth, there is sickness, there is old age, and there is death. Where there is birth, there is death. Where there is life, there is sickness, and there is old age. So again, the prince, it made him think. It was like very shocking for him, and this was what his father had never wanted him to see, the reality of life. And so the fourth time he left through this southern gate, he then saw a holy man, like a yogi, It would have been like a Hindu yogi, someone maybe sitting in a loincloth practicing austerities, maybe not eating for months or eating a tiny little grain of rice every 2 days, or the way some of them sit like with a hand in the air for 10 years or hair growing long. So he had also never seen a yogi before. And again he asked his attendant, what's he doing? What's happening here? And so he explained to them, he's a seeker. He's someone who's trying to find answers, find remedies for sickness and old age. Someone who's trying to go beyond the ordinary. So then it said that this was the first awakening for the Buddha, not in terms of enlightenment. He was not the Buddha yet, but this was after that it says he went back to the palace grounds and he sat under a tree in the palace gardens and he contemplated for the first time, he meditated. It was the beginning, really, the awakening of his spiritual path in that life. Because it does say, when you really look at the life of the Buddha, it says he had had 500 lives before that where he had practiced meritorious deeds, where he had done amazing, wonderful things, to come to that point where in this life he actually became the Buddha. But this was a very important turning point in the Buddha's life. And even though he carried on living in the life as a prince for a while, and he had a beautiful wife, and he had a beautiful son, and he carried on within the palace. Eventually, he had to leave. So when I said that we could compare this life of the Buddha to today, in a sense, the Buddha had he had a perfect life. If any life could be perfect, that was Prince Siddhartha's. If ever we could think of a better life, it would be hard to find. But he still left. He renounced it. He developed renunciation because he recognized that there is suffering. He recognized that how can I be happy within my little world of my little cocoon when out there beyond the palace gates, there are all those sick people, there are all those people who are dying, getting old, they have no help, they have no support. How can I just ignore that? So he developed, I think for the Buddha it was more than renunciation, it was also compassion. Because he was already a very great being to be in that situation. But he showed that renunciation is essential. So we compare, we can see, even now in the 21st century, somebody has everything that is you could possibly get materially. You might be very, very wealthy. You might be beautiful and young and have a beautiful wife or beautiful husband, beautiful children, perfect setup. But does that fulfill you? Does that answer all the questions? is that really everything there is? And I think it's quite easy to see that around us material wealth does not make people happy. So the Buddha's life in itself is an example. He went, then he started searching, and after exploring in many different traditions that existed in India at that time, he finally just sat down under this Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. And he gave up all teachings. He hadn't found the answers in the teachings he had explored. And he just observed. He turned inwards and observed his own mind. He had probably done a lot of that beforehand as well. But it was really, there was a time where he entered his own path. Where he started to explore and investigate in such a deep way that eventually he found the answers. And that happened under that Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha eventually achieved enlightenment. So he attained this state of freedom from suffering, total freedom from suffering. He went beyond. And so it says and then he became the Buddha. That was the time he became the Buddha. Before he was Prince Siddhartha, but with that he became the Buddha. So he sat under the Bodhi tree, and I think he sat for many days, many days, and he felt that how can I ever share this? How can I ever express this? Because what I have experienced is beyond words. This freedom that he had reached was something that was inexpressible. It could not be explained through words alone. It was something that really could only be experienced. It was not intellectual. It was direct understanding and direct experience that he had of the nature of mind, of non-duality, of the nature of reality. It was like he came to that understanding of the nature of all things. So he felt, I don't know how the Buddha felt really, but it's explained in the life of the Buddha that there was a time there where he had decided that he was not going to teach, he was not going to talk about this because he felt he was unable to. And then it says that Indra and Brahma approached him and made offerings to him and supplicated him and said, "You must teach, you must, this will benefit so many beings." And they made offerings to him, and one made offering of a conch, a beautiful conch that was a very special rare conch turning in one direction that you normally don't find, clockwise direction. And the other gift was an 8-spoked wheel, a wheel with 8 spokes, and that's what you always see at the top of temples, at least in Tibetan Buddhist temples. I think in anywhere you go, you see this 8-spoked wheel, which represents the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's a wheel, like a wheel that takes you from one place to another, and it has 8 spokes because it represents these 8 spokes of the Noble Eightfold Path that the Buddha taught. And so then the Buddha started teaching, and I'm quite sure he didn't teach the way teachings are given today. I think the Buddha very much taught through example. He lived the teachings. He embodied the teachings. He was the teachings. He shone. He had all the signs, marks and signs of a Buddha. When he taught, it says, everybody in all different languages could understand what he said. Even the birds could understand. The animals could understand. Devas and Dakinis could understand in other realms. He was the Buddha. He was not anymore an ordinary being. Even though it says in the teachings, we can all become Buddhas, but the difference between a Buddha and later enlightened beings is that he started it. He started turning this wheel of Dharma. With him, that was the beginning, 2,600 years ago. And then, so there's only one Buddha at a time, but even then it said Sakyamuni Buddha was the fourth Buddha. So, like anything, Buddhism is also impermanent. And Buddhism appears in the world, spreads, grows, people benefit, people practice, and then it declines. Like anything else, birth, old age, sickness and death, that decline, it happens to everything. This was part of the Buddha's teachings. So it also happens to Buddhism. Buddhism spreads and it also declines and fades away and dies, and until there is not even the name of the Buddha is known anymore, not even a little bit of a text left, no little broken statue sitting in a museum somewhere, nothing at all. There'll be a time then where there's no Buddhism available, no, not available like in a shop, but but it's just not existing. And then again the next Buddha appears. So it says that Sakyamuni Buddha was the fourth Buddha out of 1,000 Buddhas to come. And for that reason we have 1,000 Buddhas in the shrine room upstairs. And for that reason you often see 1,000 Buddhas in shrine rooms, exemplifying these 1,000 Buddhas. So it's like a very vast picture, isn't it? It's not just a little tiny speck of something. We talk about eons and eons. We talk about lifetimes and lifetimes. Very, very vast spans of time. But of course what relates to us right now, here and now, is Sakyamuni Buddha. The fourth Buddha was Sakyamuni Buddha. What you see here in the shrine is Sakyamuni in the center, and on his left, on your right, on his left, is the future Buddha, and on his left, on your right, is it? On his right, your left, this side, is the past Buddha. That's what the other two Buddhas symbolize. So that continuation in one way, but also the impermanence of it all. So what is important for us now is that the teachings are alive. The teachings are available. And what's also important to know is that they won't be available forever. They won't be alive. They won't exist forever. And even when we look around now today, because we know so much about what's happening around the planet. Maybe they didn't know that at the time of the Buddha. They didn't know what was happening in England and Britain and Germany and Denmark. I don't think so. I'm sure they did a lot of traveling and exchanges, but maybe not the way we can now click on, zoom in on, what is it called, satellite, the map, you can look everywhere. So we know that it's not available in all countries in the world. We know that there isn't also religious freedom in all countries of the world. So even though Buddhism is available, there is limitations. We have to recognize all these limitations, because it makes us appreciate a situation when we see this is rare and precious. And we should not waste the opportunity while we have it. But of course, what is really precious about the Buddha's teachings is how it can directly affect us personally in our own life. How we can integrate the teachings in our own life. How we can make use of them in our own life. That is what really matters to each one of us. How we can apply them directly to deal with day-to-day situations and with issues we experience. But so anyway, the Buddha reached enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. This was in Bodh Gaya, in Bodh Gaya. And then he started teaching, and his first, what we call the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, happened in Sarnath, also in Bihar, north of India, northeast of India. It's a very small town. When you go there, when you visit now, there is some old ruins there, but then there are some new monasteries, like Trungpa Rinpoche, one of the great teachers in our lineage. He has a very beautiful monastery in Sarnath. And the teachings are alive there, the teachings are practiced there. So that was where the Buddha taught and turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time. That was where he taught the Four Noble Truths. That's where he taught the Noble Eightfold Paths, which are the foundation of all the Buddha's teachings. Doesn't matter which school you follow, it doesn't matter if you're a Zen Buddhist, if you're a Theravada Buddhist, if you're a Tibetan Buddhist, Kagyu, Nyingma, Gelug, Mahayana, Hinayana, Vajrayana. The Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, is the foundation. And without the foundation, we can't really build very well, isn't it? We need a strong foundation whenever we're building. We need to have very solid foundation. That's what these first teachings of the Buddha create. His first teachings of the Buddha taught, you could say, amongst other things, renunciation. They taught about, so these Four Noble Truths, to tell you what they are, if you're not aware, it's the Noble Truth of suffering, the Noble Truth of the causes of suffering, the Noble Truth of cessation of suffering, and the Noble Truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. How do we free ourselves from suffering? So this creates a very strong foundation for our practice, our meditation, our spiritual path, I would say. This is essential that we really understand the Four Noble Truths. So the reason it's essential is that if we don't understand the truth of suffering and the causes of suffering, then we tend to fool ourselves. We tend to sort of run around in circles. We tend to look for happiness in places where it actually doesn't exist. That's what we've been doing for so long. So these Four Noble Truths are essential for us and then in order to, especially these first two Noble Truths, in order to then come to the result, which is this freedom from suffering, finding peace of mind, finding inner peace, which the teachings are about. How can we develop inner peace? Like the Dalai Lama says, outer peace is developed through developing inner peace. If we don't have inner peace, how can we expect to have outer peace? If we are not at peace with ourselves, how can we expect to have peace in the family, to have peace with our friends, to have peace with our colleagues, to have peace with our neighbors, to have peace within the country, etc., as you go wider and wider? If we haven't found inner peace, it's very, very difficult to be at peace with anything externally if we're not at peace with ourselves. And so what the Buddha taught in these Four Noble Truths, he said, is first we must understand what is pain and suffering. What is pain? And like some people think, Buddhism is all about suffering. Buddhism it's all they talk about, Buddhists. They're all, such a depressing religion, depressing philosophy, because it's all, Buddha talked about suffering. But of course, what the Buddha really taught about is, how do we free ourselves from suffering? How do we get out of it? And why are we suffering? What are the causes? What are the reasons that we have a hard time? How come we are not blissful all the time if we have everything we need? If everything is actually okay, theoretically? Why is there so much depression? Why is there so much stress? Why is there so much anxiety? Why are people killing each other, etc., etc.? It's clear to see that there are problems. So the Buddha said that we must understand suffering. And of course the teachings, like in India in those days, were in Sanskrit. So the word for that we translate as suffering, we say the noble truth of suffering. This was dukkha in Sanskrit. So I don't understand Sanskrit myself, but the way I have been taught is that the meaning of dukkha is actually very vast. It's very wide. It's not just suffering. Suffering is a very big word, and there is a lot of suffering in the world. We can look, there's floods in East, there's floods in West, there's wars here, there's famine there, there's lots and lots of people who are in very extreme situations. In London, there's been all sorts of sufferings in many different ways. So suffering, yes, there is very intense suffering, but dukkha itself means more than that. It means incapable of satisfying. It means being unsatisfied. That whatever we are trying to, all the methods we are using to satisfy ourselves, they are not really doing the job. So that's one meaning of dukkha. It also means not to be able to bear something, not to be able to withstand something, not to be able to carry a burden because it's too heavy. It means also even things like words like stress. It means discomfort. Unease is dukkha. Dissatisfaction is dukkha. And in fact, anything temporary is dukkha. So it has a very, very vast meaning in terms of feelings and experiences. It's not intense suffering only. It's intense dukkha, or it is the noble truth of dukkha instead of the noble truth of suffering. It's the noble truth that tells us that there is dissatisfaction, and it's very, very difficult to, actually impossible to find satisfaction and contentment through external things. And I think it's important to remember here it says anything temporary. Temporary, because is there anything that's not temporary? The Buddha's teaching is not saying that there is no happiness. There is happiness, there is moments of peace, there is moments of joy, there is moments of happiness, there's times of happiness, there's good times, there's bad times, there's wonderful times, but all of them are temporary. Everything is temporary. That's part of our problem. That's part of the issue, impermanence. So even happiness is a form of dukkha. The way the Buddha explains it, the way it's taught, is that even our most joyful moments have an element of dukkha within relative world. And when you look at this dukkha, it's taught as you have the suffering or dukkha of pain, suffering of pain. So like very obvious difficulties, very obvious pain, very obvious dukkha. Physical, emotional, mental pain, where we are in it's very clear situations. We are, like I mentioned before, when we have these, you can be in extreme, there can be environmental disasters, there can be wars, there can be great losses, or even loss of a job, or loss of a close one, or loss of our health, whatever. This is clear suffering, isn't it? It's a state of pain and unease. It's not a happy state. So then there's also the suffering of, or the dukkha of impermanence, or of change, as a separate category. If we say these different classes of dukkha, there's the suffering of impermanence. Now, we tend to live our lives as if it was permanent, isn't it? We certainly in the Western society, we don't like to talk about death. We don't like to think about death. We don't like to talk about it to our families, our parents when they get older. Often people die without having even had a discussion about the fact that they are dying, even though everybody in the family know. We don't like to think about impermanence and change, which implies death. We can, but as part of the teachings is we are encouraged to contemplate death, to contemplate all these things that the Buddha saw when he left the palace gate. Contemplate sickness, contemplate death, contemplate our own death, contemplate the death and the loss of others. Be aware that this is part of life. And if we are aware that it's part of life, then we will live our life more fully. We won't think that, it will last forever and death is never going to come to me. Certainly not now because I'm still young. Certainly I will live till I'm 80 or 90 because my parents did, my grandparents did. Of course, there's no guarantee whatsoever. And if we have no preparation, no thought of this, and if we live our life as if it will last forever, then we do suffer due to impermanence. But if we can accept impermanence and live our life with that knowledge and awareness of change, acceptance of change, then change is much easier. There's less struggle, there's less pain. When our body gets old, when we have, we look at change in our relationships change all the time. Friends become enemies, enemies become friends. We look at the people who were our closest friends, maybe we call them inseparable friends 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago. Do we still know them? Do we still talk to them? Are they still close friends? Are they enemies? Now, people move through our life in that way. So this is impermanence, this is change. We cannot just ignore it because it causes suffering if we don't accept and live accordingly. So suffering of change and impermanence is dukkha, this noble truth of dukkha. And then the suffering of conditioned existence, or it's called also all-pervading dukkha. So this is can be a more subtle form of dukkha, where all of existence, there is an underlying uncertainty, there's an underlying, maybe due to impermanence, but as long as there is duality, there is fear, and there is uncertainty. Fear and uncertainty go together. But with this suffering of conditioned existence, it is about recognizing that everything is interdependent. Everything is dependent on something else. Everything affects everything else. And whatever we see, hear, touch affects us. Whatever we do affects others. Whatever we eat, whatever we wear, the objects we come into contact with, we are relying on others for those objects. We are totally interdependent, and everything is affected by something else. So this also, there's a subtle suffering there. Now this, the first noble truth of suffering, it's teaching us that we go through these experiences of, through our senses, whatever we are experiencing, but in Sanskrit it's called the skandhas, and we go through this process of, through our experiences, we are chasing, we are grasping, we are running away, we are trying to hold on to the things that we think will give us happiness. And this chasing, constant sort of desire, you could say restlessness, this gives a sense of solidity. And the Buddha says this is an illusion. This builds up an illusory sense of I, and that this self is, so the Buddha taught also, there is no self within all these experiences that we are chasing. Now this is like a very big statement, but the reason it's important for us to know and to think about that is because the Buddha is saying, all of this stuff that's going on, all of these experiences that we have and that we identify with, all of these ups and downs that we identify with, and what I was explaining, loss and gain, one moment you have your house, the next moment it's been washed away by a flood, or it's been burned in a fire, or the things that happen in life. All of these ups and downs, that is not the feelings that arise due to that, that's not really who we are. That's not who we are, but we suffer due to the involvement with all those things. So that's, in a way, you could say, it comes onto the causes, the second noble truth, the causes of suffering. What the Buddha said in the first noble truth is it's important to acknowledge this dukkha, to understand the nature of dukkha, so that we don't chase after the things that actually don't give us happiness, but only give us more suffering. So that if we're going to chase after the things that really help us, chase after the things that will bring us happiness, but don't chase after the things that only give us more dukkha. That was what he was saying. We need to understand the nature, acknowledge and acknowledge that there is this suffering, understand the nature of this suffering, this dukkha, and then there is the encouragement that it's possible to free oneself from it. So that is when we say the Four Noble Truths, that is the acknowledgement of the suffering and the encouragement that it's possible to free oneself from this. It's possible to find inner peace. It's possible to be totally fearless, at peace with oneself, full of compassion, with all the qualities of a Buddha, the wisdom, the power, the compassion of a Buddha. That is possible for all of us to achieve. So it is a very encouraging message, but the Buddha is saying, first of all, we must acknowledge this suffering that is there. We must acknowledge that just chasing externally for happiness is not actually going to get us very far. And he said that we should regard the teachings as, or we should regard the Buddha as the doctor, as a physician. We should regard ourselves as the patient, and we should regard the teachings and the practice as the medicine. So the teachings of the Buddha are about, the mind. What do we then do? So of course, a lot of the Buddhist teachings are about meditation. So the medicine. So he said we should regard ourselves as the patient, someone who's ill. So we should always be taking our blood pressure. We should always be taking our pulse, checking how am I doing. What are things like? What is my blood sugar? Whatever we are. What is my blood pressure like? Depending on what we are suffering from, we should go and see the doctor. We should find out and what is our sickness. So get this analysis, get this diagnosis from the doctor, and then get the prescription. We get the prescription. We take the medicine. That's how we should relate to the teaching. See it as medicine, that we meditate to find freedom from this suffering, just like a patient. And then there is this encouragement that if we keep taking the medicine, we will get better. We keep taking it, we will be, perfectly cured. I think that's the key point in the first Noble Truth, is that acknowledgement. We're clear that there is suffering, and then we need to work on eliminating the causes of suffering. And then the second Noble Truth looks at the truth of the causes of suffering. So why? Why is there all the confusion? Why is there pain, apart from describing these different types of dukkha, but then really looking at the mind and what causes suffering? That's the second Noble Truth.